Hello everybody, my name is Vince, and today I'm just going to be showing you how to set up DS Wi-Fi for MelonDS to play DS games online. Now, there are several ways to go about this, but I'm just going to go with the easiest all the way to the most complicated ways. So, first off, we'll be starting off with the easiest way, which is quite effortless, actually. All you basically need is MelonDS and a custom DNS. So, I've briefly shown this in this YouTube short, TikTok, whatever you would call it, and it's just basically as simple as the video shows. But just for a quick rundown, here's what you gotta do. So for this example, we're going to be using Mario Kart DS, and we're going to be going to its Wi-Fi connection setup. We're going to search for an access point. There we are, Melon AP. Nice thing about MelonDS is that it has its own little access point that's built into the emulator. You can test a connection, and by default, it just works. Alright, so we're actually going to go into the settings. Let's go into click ready, and we're going to scroll all the way down to auto obtain DNS. We are going to click no, and then we are going to set our own primary and secondary DNS. The primary DNS is 178.62.43.212. And the secondary DNS is 1.1.1.1. Now that we have that, we have saved our settings, and for the sake of it, we can test a connection, like so. Alright, so we got all that set up, and the reason why I'm using Mario Kart DS is just because if you use Metroid Prime Hunters, for instance, it wants to shut off every time you want to set up your Wi-Fi settings, which is massively inconvenient, especially when you're doing a tutorial like this. And what we have here is that we're connecting to WSC, but we need to sync our Wi-Fi settings, or this game, to our system, which was something that you had to do back in the DS days. And it messes with your FRED code and everything, so I recommend only doing this once. And we are connected to Nintendo WFC via custom server. If we didn't have those Wi-Fi settings set to that custom DNS, we would get an error code before we even get this far. We wouldn't even see the green bar. Now, in older versions of MelonDS, you needed things called BIOS files and a firmware file. This is something you had to acquire, usually by hacking your DS. There are other ways of doing this, and I'm actually going to go over all the various ways of going about this, because there is still reasons to do this. The most blatant example I can think of is for mobile gaming. Now, if you're doing mobile gaming, I heavily recommend some mobile gaming for something like Mario Kart DS. Very nice to use, very convenient. There are various ways to do it, so I'm going to go through all the various ways you can get your BIOS files and your firmware. So, what's the easiest way to get your BIOS and firmware files? Cheat, of course!
I'm a big cheater! Cheating helped me!
So I don't think I need to teach you how to use Google. Just type in, how does one get the BIOS and firmware of DS? And oh no, Nintendo is probably not going to let me show you this part with this video staying up. But a good source I can give out is Turnet Chive Array. The rest I think you can do on your own, not because I think you are particularly smart, but just because I can't. Why am I so sarcastic here? Alright, now let's try hacking with integrity this time. So what you're going to need is a DS of any kind. The standard DS and DS Lites are the best, whereas something like a 3DS or a DSi tends to have iffy results. You are also going to need a flash cart, which you can buy for about $10. Any kind should do, as long as it's designed like a DS cart and it has a detachable memory card. And you are going to need to download something called dsibiosdumper. I am currently using the November 19th release, and it works really well. So a problem I tended to have with older versions of dsibiosdumper is that it was more or less incompatible with newer lines of the DS series, such as DSi and 3DS. It tended to have unusable versions of BIOS files. So it is important to get one of the more up-to-date versions. So be absolutely sure to download the 1.2.1 version. So what we got to do is put the micro SD card into our computer. Usually you're just going to need some sort of converter like I have right here. Plug her in. And all we need to do is download the GitHub file, the 1.2.1 dsibiosdumper, and then just place the file into the firmware dumper folder in the root of your SD card. Usually helps to have a folder. Once that's there, we can now eject the SD card, put it back into the flash cart, and then put that flash cart into the DS. We just turn it on, and you'll see like for me, it's just like this SpongeBob SquarePants game. I have no idea. We just click the DS game card. Then we go to the H3DS's NDS file to check the firmware dumper. And it should just instantly download all the BIOS files that you need. And there you go. Now there's one last reliable way I can think of to get your BIOS and firmwares from your DSi, and while it's really complicated, I'm going to try and show it the best I can anyway, just for the sake of people who don't necessarily have the resources, or if certain downloaded BIOS and firmware files don't work because they're from a banned console. And I will let you know one last thing before you actually go about doing the DSi version, is that once you do it, it is irreversible and may render your DSi unusable if you decide to uninstall any of this stuff. The program will, in fact, give you this nice little disclaimer. So I'm just going to read off of the DS Homebrew website. I'm trying to explain this as thoroughly as I can. So first we're going to download dsibiosdumper. Then we got to extract the file from the zip folder. We're going to copy dsibiosdumper.nds from the dsibiosdumper to the root of your SD card. Now for this, we need to do homebrewing, which means we're going to need the Twilight menu, and we're also going to need the dump tool. And finally, we're going to need an exploit to actually get us to homebrewing. I am personally going to be choosing Flipnote Lenny. That's provided me the best results. And it's relatively easy to do, provided you have Flipnote Studio. And we're going to download, just go to this link, and then the download should be right there. Alright, so that's quite a few files, so we're also going to need to extract a few files and then pick the right ones. Alright, so let's first extract Twilight menu. And then we're looking for NDS. And we are also looking for boot.nds. And then we are also looking for dump tool, which was the download on step 3. And these are the ones for the homebrewing end of things. So we're going to put that to the SD card. And there we are. So you might already see that I already have these files on hand. I'm just replacing them for the heck of it. And while that waits, let's get our Flipnote Lenny file. So let's extract that. And we are going to need the private folder. And we're going to copy or cut that. And then we're going to paste that to the SD card. And I already have that file as well. I'm just going to replace it because I already have it. And that should be part 2 of all the dumping tools we need. So for this final bit, we're also going to need a couple of files called unlaunch and god mode. These are just to help us actually go through the hacking process. Not sure why they work, but they just do. So let's just download unlaunch, and then we need god mode 9i.dsi. We're going to extract unlaunch, and god mode DSI is already unpackaged for us. Thank you very much. Alright, and then we just put those in the root of the SD card, and then we're good to go. And then finally, let's reinsert the SD card back into the DSI. This is the easy part. So, from this point on, we are going to be homebrewing our DSI. We're going to be using the Flipnote Lenny method. So let's power on. Let's go to our Flipnote Studio. That should be with your DSI. Alright. We're going to go to the wrench, the settings option, and to the right. Keep going right until you see the calendar setting. So we're going to check the settings, and on the top right, we got to make sure that Start on Calendar is disabled and that the frog is enabled. We're going to go back. I'm going to go to View Flipnote. We're going to look in the SD card. And we should have already downloaded the downloaded Flipnote Lenny file. We're going to click on the USA version, because I'm an American. For European and Australian users, you use the Europe version, which I assume is a separate download. Alright, so then we are going to edit the selected Flipnote. Go to the frog icon, and on the film roll, I'm going to go to Copy, head back, and then Exit. And then on the second note with the larger face, select Edit. And from here we go to the frog. We're going to go to the film roll again, and then we're going to hit Paste. So you'll see the screen turn magenta for a second, which means it should work. What this does is allows us to get to the exploit, the homebrew exploit. So we are going to select our language. You can see that the gamepad can allow us to choose and select language, and press A when you're done so that we can proceed. I speak USA, so that's what I am choosing. Okay, so now we should have a modified DSI opening screen. Touchscreen to continue, and we should have the Twilight menu set up. This takes a little bit of a time to load. Usually takes about 15 seconds, and we are going to scroll on over. So from here we can boot up God Mode 9. There it is. There's the booting screen. We press A when we are selected on root. And we are looking to find unlaunch. Unlaunch has a hard time booting from the Twilight menu, so this is why we use God Mode. So we just scroll until we find unlaunch. And then we just select it, and then select it again to boot this file. And then you'll immediately come to this very strange boot up screen as one of the options. But for now, we are going to should go through an installation process. You'll need to look for install now. It should install. And then we just simply turn it off and then back on again. Just a simple tap of the power button. And now we just scroll down to the dsibiosdumper, which is all the way nearly down, at least for this DSI that I have right here. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we press the A button to dump everything. We're going to want everything. This will take several minutes, so I will skip ahead to the end. We're just now at 3%. And there we go. That's all the firmware, the BIOS files, and that's pretty much everything. We can now officially finish this part of the thing and actually go to the next phase. Boy, that took forever. Okay, so now that we got all our files, we are going to actually have to rename them in order for them to be usable. Now, in this example right here, you can see that our BIOS 9 and 7 are ROM files, and our firmware is a binary file. Sometimes the firmware is like a series of letters and numbers, and you still have to rename it to firmware. But you have to rename the BIOS files regardless, and you have to get rid of the .rom extension. So we're going to rename BIOS NDS 9 to bios9.bin, and it'll ask if you change the name extension, might become unusable, but we want to do that. So, and we're going to do the same thing to BIOS 7, bios7.bin. Likewise, we get that error, we get that warning message. All right, so these files are now usable. Don't worry about the size of the different sizes of the firmwares. On the right example is what I'm using from a DSI. This one's from a DS. Either way, the sizes are fine. Let's move these over to my tutorial folder, and let's just copy paste them. All right. So now we got to go to the emulator settings, and we're going to use external firmware and BIOS files. So from the top, we got to get dsarm9. So we are going to switch out our BIOS files, dsarm9. We're going to go to our tutorial, and there it is. Tutorial for 7. And firmware finally. So let's boot up Mario Kart DS to make things quick and easy. Squad looking friggity fresh. I'm gonna go to our WFC settings. We gotta go through this song and dance again. Yeah, just say yes to everything. Just say yes and okay. Fingers crossed. Perfect. We have been connected. Nice. Alright. Let's just disconnect from WFC. And now I'm going to be talking about common troubleshooting issues that I've had, and a few other quirks if I can think of them. Alright, so here's an easy one to solve. Error code 80430. This is more of a limitation of the DS. DSs that use the same router for Wi-Fi just cannot connect to each other in a local sense. In such a scenario, you would just go local wireless instead of Wi-Fi. But imagine a scenario where one of your friends is local and another friend is far away. How do you all connect? But a nice little idea that you can employ is if one of the two local friends switches to MelonDS on mobile and uses mobile data and make an artificial hotspot. All three friends in this scenario could connect to each other. Just remember to turn your Wi-Fi back on afterwards. There is the possibility of all parties going local, but one, that's still an experimental feature being implemented by MelonDS, which is still a work in progress as I speak. And two, this would likely mean sharing IP addresses, which that is a lot more risky, unless all parties are trustworthy with each other. It's just safer to go Wi-Fi at that point. So a common troubleshooting issue that I tend to see is that your BIOS 9 file tends to be 0 kilobytes. Now, what this means is that MelonDS is just not capable of using BIOS 9 as a valid dump, as a valid BIOS file. It'll just straight up not let you play games with that BIOS file being used. This is easily solved by downloading the most recent version of dsibiosdumper. I'm personally using the 1.2.1 version, and it works perfectly fine, at least as far as original DS and DS Lites go. Now, on the other hand of things, a problem I've personally seen is that sometimes the BIOS 7 file will just be unusable in a very different way. It'll look fine at first, but when you try to boot up MelonDS with that BIOS file in mind, it'll just open up to a white screen. This is something I've noticed with 3DS BIOS 7s and DSi BIOS 7s that don't use the dsibiosdumper. I'm not sure why this is the case, but it's just a problem I've consistently noticed. This is what I meant by when using a 3DS, it's a little bit iffy, whereas it's perfectly fine to use a DS. Finally, there's an issue I've noticed a couple of years ago where you just cannot connect to the internet. Now, from what I understand, it is a firmware that is banned, that has a banned DS console, and that means this is not your fault. It is just someone who cheated, cheated you out of a DS experience, and that is sad. So if you download it from the internet and it just cannot connect to the internet, there's a very likely chance that that DS firmware, that DS console that you got it from has been banned. And that is something that I've constantly noticed a couple of years ago. That's why I want people to look into DS BIOS dumping and firmware dumping on their own time, using their own resources instead of just relying on the online. The last point I want to make is that if you have issues doing it one way, then you can probably solve it by using interchangeable parts. So if you have a problem with BIOS 9, then doing it a different way is most likely to be able to solve it for you. So, for instance, you could actually use BIOS 7 downloaded from the internet, a BIOS 9 downloaded from a 3DS, and a firmware that has been downloaded from a regular DS. And it would actually work. I've tested this several times, several different combinations, and as long as the BIOS or firmwares work individually, then they will, in fact, work on a different firmware or different BIOS acquired from a different DS. That's the interesting part about it. And yeah, so don't let this stump you. This is why I've shown you all these various different ways of doing it, because if one way doesn't work, then another can fill in the blanks for you. And I believe with that said, I have thoroughly given you guys options on how to get your DS Wi-Fi to work on MelonDS. Alright, so before I head on out, I'm just going to give a few credits, and we're excited for the MelonDS website. Credit to Arisotura and the rest of the MelonDS staff. For dsibiosdumper, I'm going to say thank you to rocketrobz, lifehackerhansol, Epic Pikmin 11, and SombrAbsol. For dsibiosdumper, Once again, credit to rocketrobz, Epic Pikmin, emiyl, Nightscript 370, jerbmega, lifehackerhansol, and various others for their work. For Flipnote Lenny, thank you to Stefan and Smee for their website, and to the user Dave Murphy for their tutorial on Flipnote Lenny. Go check that out. And finally, a quick little shout out to the YouTube user JK, who basically introduced MelonDS and its Wi-Fi capabilities to me with his Metroid Prime Hunters tutorials. Very informative dude. He knows what he's talking about. Thank you very much. I hope this has been very informative. My name is Vince, and I am out.